Hello everybody. It is a pleasure to have this opportunity today to spend time together thinking about the future of Montenegro. A key question here is, how can blockchain law help Montenegrins? The opportunity facing us is to build a healthy, sustainable blockchain industry that serves our people and sets a global example. We are grateful to be joined by friends of Montenegro, unique experts and researchers that have come from all around the world to brainstorm and workshop with us, and to think about the ways we might realize our future. This event is made possible with the generosity of the officials and communities here in Montenegro. 3 of our original panelists as well decided to give more time to Montenegrins to get to hear from our guests today and from our audience. So thank you. We are very pleased to introduce our guests. Vitalik, the founder of Ethereum. Vlad, the lead researcher of Ethereum. And Boris, international law professor. Blockchain technologies and cryptocurrencies, like everything made with human design, is full of democratic promise, but also brings blind spots and challenges. How can we navigate these complex human problems in global governance and lead to positive outcomes? What do these results look like, and how can we ensure their development? What does it look like to act responsible in this new world of struggle? There will be many more questions to answer on this topic, and today is a testament to the spirit of innovation and community. And we are making amazing progress in blockchain law to bring Montenegro on the world map of the crypto space. I will turn to our guests on the panel for the next 40 minutes, okay? And then open the conversation to our audience. We will have an email address that you can send your questions. It will be, Dushka, help me, it's crypto. Everybody heard this? No. Okay, so you have to repeat this. Okay, so she will help us write it so nobody, and then we can pick and choose a couple of questions that are relevant, and we can answer on that. Okay, so thank you for joining us today. Vitalik, you flew in. Podgorica was very gloomy, and then we went over Lovchen, which was also very snowy. And however, what Boris told me is that you saw a nice rainbow when you were going down. So is that rainbow a promise of a better future of Montenegro with new crypto assets and blockchain law? What do you think?
I mean, as far as I can tell, Montenegro is pretty great at the present already. But definitely very hopeful and very excited to see what this all of this works.
Thank you. How can we actually foster the crypto and blockchain industry in Montenegro? What do you think are the necessary steps that we as a government, but also like the private sector and all the stakeholders in Montenegro, need to do in order to make a better environment for the crypto and blockchain industry?
Yeah, so I think one aspect of this is obviously legislation, and a big part of that is just like making it friendly and making it possible for crypto companies to set themselves up in Montenegro, or just do things in Montenegro if they're multinational, and at the same time, you also want to kind of encourage the best of the crypto space more than you're attracting the worst elements of the crypto space. So I think the best thing to have is not just maximum friendliness to everything, but kind of this fairly selective friendliness to the extent that you actually can without ending up making things harder for everyone. I think. And there's also 2 different parts to that, right? Because I think in the 21st century, jurisdictions are both, places to kind of register a business, and they're places for people to live. And places like the Cayman Islands, for example, focused on the first, and like nobody really thinks of them in terms of the second, but like Montenegro actually does like seem like a very good place for people to live, and I think like people might want to move their companies here, like be digital nomads, like be here part time, be based in here if they're from Europe or whatever. So I think like that aspect of things is also important to try to kind of cultivate, and also like actually use Montenegro itself as kind of like a test bed for different kinds of crypto applications. Like try to think like can we actually like figure out how to like make say blockchain based like in-person payments work and like actually get a lot of benefits from it, or even use like blockchain and cryptographic infrastructure to do things around like identity related things, maybe even government services, like things like making voting like cryptographically secure. I mean, probably like not for the whole country, but you could imagine like even newer kinds of voting, like polls and petitions and so forth to start off. So like just look at kind of things at every level there. Aside from the that kind of like legislation side, I think education is also very important. Like helping people locally who wants to be part of the space kind of understand better what's going on, like what are the key technologies, like how do they kind of actually start participating in development, participating in research, building applications, building the protocol, building or even like participating in the wider kind of public discussion of like what kinds of things the blockchains can be for, and all of those things. So I think that's important too. So I think in general, like legislation and education are two of the biggest ones. And then aside from that, like I think those are things that like kind of can be done institutionally. But I also think crypto is inherently a very bottom-up space, and it's a space where kind of anyone can contribute, and there's a really important role for like local community leaders, for example. People like running meetup groups, people are like doing like some organizing like blockchain education on their own. Like that is something that I think anyone can do and help, like organizing spaces for people to work in this, and that's something that I think anyone in the country can participate in, and like it's also important in making a great community.
Thank you, sir. I think definitely fostering community is a big part of the game as well. You mentioned the decentralized identity, which is something that I'm also very interested in. As a government member, for us it's important that you have some proofs of identity, such as passports, IDs, health cards, etc. What do you think in that sense? Like, what's the role of the government? And is there a role, like significant role of the government? And how can we proceed in this field?
Sure. So I think like my general philosophy regarding blockchain identity is that I believe in blockchain identity. I don't believe in blockchain identity platforms. And what I mean by this is that like I don't really believe in people kind of within their own company making these big kind of full stack things where they figure out like here is our quote identity wallet, like here is our ways to make an attestation, like here's our ways for people to sign things, and just like expect an ecosystem to immediately kind of absorb and adopt all of their stuff. Like I think that kind of approach just like it doesn't work well with like how the blockchain space works at a very fundamental level. Like the way that I think blockchain identity makes more sense is this kind of more organic approach where like we're already seeing like different aspects of like that you could call identity kind of start to spring up, right? So like one example is that last year the Ethereum Foundation like put a lot of resources into this kind of sign in with Ethereum concept. So like you could use your Ethereum account to sign into services that kind of integrate the standard, and so like basically you can sign in with an Ethereum account just like you sign in with a Google or Facebook account, but without needing to have like a Google or a Facebook actually manage your identity. And like that's only one piece, right? And then another example is like there's proof of humanity, which is like an attestation that proves that like this account corresponds to a unique human. So you can get one of them, but you can't get 100 of them, even if you have 100 times more money. And like people use that for like voting. People use that for like universal basic income coins. And then like you can think of like other kinds of attestations that can be added on top, right? So like the government could be an attester and like attest, this is a Montenegrin citizen or resident. Educational institutions like kind of could make attestations. Like you could potentially have like attestations of like pretty much anything that people would want to validate. So I think it's like identity is an ecosystem, and both governments and educational institutions, and like I think like ultimately people in general are all have a part to play in that ecosystem, and like I think the network effects around this stuff are already growing and only grow more over time.
Yes, Vlad, go ahead. You wanna chip in as well?
Hey guys, I just want to say that identity is a very, very problematic concept, and that basically like when people think about their identity, whether it's like their like moral, political, legal, religious identity, or like the way they identify with their NFT, it's very different than the sense in which we're using this identity now, right? This is what I would call credential and access control management, and it's important to not be defined your identity by your credentials. It's like imagine, because you can get into a certain place because with a bracelet, you start to identify with that bracelet. It's very dangerous politically. It's very dangerous, to call it identity. And I just want to intervene and say, but let's call it credentials. Let's call it access, and not identity, because when it becomes identity, it's too personal, and it's philosophically confused with many, many other notions of identity. And so, as like a way to put the brakes on, I just want to say, this is all great for credential and access control management.
Boris, please.
And just building on that, I think it's also important to realize that there are plural identities, and increasingly people inhabit multiple online personas, digital identities. And so when we think about blockchain integrations of identity, we think about multiple cultures and communities that people may want to belong to in the metaverse. And I think it's important to respect people's expectations and to be able to inhabit multiple identities, including having multiple legal identities.
Thank you. So Vlad, I'm a Minister of Finance, and what I care about paying taxes, people paying taxes. So I like transparency, I like people not avoiding taxes. Is there such a thing as a balance between tax prudence on one side and financial privacy on the other side? And how can we preserve the spirit of crypto, but also bring scammers to justice? And we discussed yesterday when we were going over the law draft that there'll be we have to think about who should be regulated and who should be licensed. As a regulator, usually I would think, okay, it's the centralized players like the middleman, they have to be regulated. But in decentralized worlds such as blockchain, that's not enough. And you had a very interesting thoughts on that. So can you share some of that? Thank you.
Well, that's like 3 questions, so let me try. First question first. So on the tax and balancing tax obligations with privacy, and I think that's a great question. And I think what the clear thing is that the sort of full tax audit, it doesn't provide you a lot of privacy from the auditor. However, and there's different sort of tax regimes all over the world, and there are regimes that are more sort of privacy-centric, where basically you can basically negotiate with them, that you can convince them in like an interactive zero-knowledge proof joke, but like an interactive legal argument. You convince them that basically like this amount is sort of more than you owe, and they don't need to look at anything else but just accept that amount. It's like a settlement. So tax settlement today I think may offer this in some cases. Also we have a sort of lot of disclosures that people don't make honestly, right? And so that also provides a lot of privacy, and maybe isn't great for collecting taxes. And I think the main sort of the main thing though is that there's sort of like a relationship between tax authorities and citizens, and sort of there's only so much burden that they can place on each other, and so much, and so there's a kind of like it's a real legal situation where you have to like figure it out on a case by case basis based on like sort of the country and the taxpayer. And so in my opinion, like this is somewhere where like the rule of law can help a lot in determining, you know, which cases you actually need to audit and where you can respect people's privacy. That actually helps with the next sort of two questions. Basically, like the rule of law is like a good sort of theme for, you know, how do we sort of like regulate crypto, you know, from bad actors inside. Is that the second question? Is that right? Yeah.
So the second question. So the second question was actually as kind of a little iteration of the first one. How can we preserve spirit of crypto, but also bring scammers to justice? Like, what is the?
Yeah, I mean, the rule of law is very good at figuring out, you know, who's a scammer and who's not, and like people are very, very good at this as like investigators. You know, it's not a matter of sort of like necessarily easy to predict what evidence ultimately will show you someone's criminal intent, but basically there's like you know, I mean, the rule of law is like very, very good at that, and basically it's something where it's really important because, you know, the way that like bad money drives out good money, like bad crypto drives out good crypto, and you will get basically the sort of the community you want to have be driven out by people who will do things that they can do, sort of, you know, if they can set up places for crypto people to hang out, they can participate and contribute, and then sort of exploit the situation in a bad faith way that ends up sort of pushing out the people who you want to be there. And so it's like really important to cultivate an environment that makes people feel safe if they're sort of the people who are creating value, as opposed to feeling like they're being predated on all the time by the sharks and the scammers. And so, you know, in crypto it's very important, and there isn't like a rule of thumb. There's like case by case judgment and to determine sort of people's criminal psychology and criminal intent. And then once you sort of pin that down and say, okay, like you can think about whether that's bad enough that you need to, like, you know, revoke their license or more. You know, so basically it's like a rule of law question that I would say is like ultimately like a criminal law question. And so and then the third question.
The third question was who should be regulated and licensed. You know, that's the question we were you know spending hours on yesterday. So it's a really, really good point.
I mean, like, get real. Everyone is regulated. Licensed is maybe not everyone. Like, not everyone is like designated and licensed, but like in like the real law, you know, not the pretend like official legal truth. Like everyone is regulated, and the rule of law is like, you know, coming for everyone and regulate everyone's behavior, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. And so I guess, you know, the recognizing that fact in crypto in particular means sort of you know, imagining that it can't just be, like you were saying, centralized parties that lead to a sort of like lawful outcome, but it has to be people exercising judgment in their context and like sort of like having basic legal education across the board. And I mean, I think that's sort of you know, like you know, which isn't to say that you can't be regulated in a very nice way that just exempts you from many requirements. Like you could be regulated, and the only terms in like sort of like the positive law, like the official law, is that you're exempted from requirements. It could be, and so actually like being regulated doesn't actually have the connotation of, at least to me, of being controlled. It means that like sort of you're a subject of the regulation, and like it talks about you and says something about you, but also being sort of in this broader sense of sort of the through the way that you control your own behavior based on like everything you know, the sort of like self-regulation, but you know, not in a way where you could imagine that like you determined your judgments, but like the way that like sort of like the law got into you and informed your judgments. And so you don't necessarily have like a private judgment that you can have, but you know, just like you don't have like a private language, you're part of this public legal setting, and through that gain a legal personhood and then embody the law and like act in a lawful way, because like that's your better judgment. And like sort of like that's like the way to go ultimately. And like regulation therefore like sort of has these different levels, and what it means for someone to be regulated may mean sort of, you know, it's like in the official law being mentioned. It may mean like in the real law having someone tightly control your behavior, But it may also mean you controlling your own behavior, according to like what you think is lawful, and sort of, but also recognizing that you don't have that choice. You can't just decide what's lawful and not for yourself. You like really, you need to recognize that you don't control what you think is the right thing to do. That's like something like morality and law or something are interpersonal things, and we don't get to just decide.
Sure, but it's also important. Vitalik, you're going to chip in as well. But it's important, like that we can assess the risk of the different players and like prioritize the ones that are most important to the system of acting lawfully, right? Like because it's you have limited resources and it's very difficult to kind of allocate resources for absolutely everybody and to license the heck out of everyone. Vitalik, you wanted?
Yeah, I mean, I think like one thing that I generally care about is like just simplifying burdens and reducing burdens where possible, and when there's a choice of who to assign the burden to, like having it concentrated in kind of fewer and more sophisticated parties that can handle it. I think it's generally better, than kind of actually distributing large burdens to people where possible. And I think crypto actually offers some opportunities to kind of do better at kind of satisfying those goals and satisfying the goals of regulation at the same time than I think you might even imagine with previous technology. So in the case of let's say tax compliance, for example, right? So Montenegro is relatively much more dependent on VAT than it is on income taxes, which from a tax compliance privacy perspective, I actually think is very good. And you could with crypto, you could easily imagine if making VAT compliance very easy, right? Basically, one very simple strawman approach would be that you just if you give people an option where if they only accept payments through a wallet that basically is a smart contract that automatically transfers let's say 18% or whatever percentage of what it receives to the tax authority just immediately. Then if you do this and if you kind of promise that you're always going to use these wallets, then you have zero need to file any kind of forms whatsoever, right? So real time, no accounting, no forms, and it just happens, right? So that's both a very nice from the perspective of merchants because they just have to turn on the right setting on their wallets, and it is also I think nice from the perspective of the tax authority. They don't have to kind of for example the risk that the taxpayer goes bankrupt until before they have to pay the taxes. It's kind of very easy for them, and you can even kind of combine this with privacy technologies, right? Even if every single payment was kind of made through an anonymizer, it doesn't matter. You see on chain that 18% of it is going into a government wallet, and you're fine, right? And so I think this kind of approach is not always possible, right? Because sometimes what a legal responsibility is kind of too subjective to smart contractify that way. But in those cases where it can, I think there definitely are a lot of things like that probably could be done better for everyone. So.
I just want to respond to the earlier point before it gets too far into the past. There's ways to reduce sort of everyone's liability overall, and it's not necessarily that you need to move it all into a concentrated place. Actually, if we make everything someone's liability, they become super duper liable. The way that the financial fiduciaries are super liable because they have other people's money. There's more liability than if everyone was controlling their own money in some way. But there's it may help with risk, but it isn't necessarily. I think it may lead to more liability to centralize the regulation. I don't think it's just that there's I don't think there's a conservation of liability. There's even paradoxes of liability where you could create liability crazy very easily. You can also work together to reduce liability, and you can also in some ways very easily reduce liability. And so there's a kind of mysterious, complicated, but sometimes very straightforward sort of liability sort of system.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is the thing that the cool kids call instead of don't be evil, can't be evil. And I think you can definitely kind of overstate the extent to which that slogan works, but I think there definitely is some extent to which right even the example of self-hosted wallets instead of there being kind of one big intermediary for everyone, or even kind of decentralized social recovery and things like that. Yeah, I guess this plays into the idea that like crypto technology in general, that like it makes it much easier to like structure those relationships in a lot of different ways. And I guess maybe one of the points here is that like some of those structurings are more sustainable than others, and like one thing that probably like a better law would do is that like from a liability perspective, like it makes the better approaches actually give less exposure than the worse approaches.
Boris, so you're a law person. So you often is said code is law. What is meant by that? Like in crypto community.
Yeah, thank you. So I'd say that Vitalik and Vlad are like law people as well. Crypto lawyers in many ways. I think code as law has lots of dimensions within crypto. So it refers to the idea that smart contracts, for instance, are self-executing, self-enforcing contracts with a legal character. So the idea that once a script is run and executes some particular set of commands, the performance obligations of the parties that combine their resources into this particular smart contract should be automatically enforced by the underlying protocol, and as important, be legally binding. Unfortunately, legal reality, is not that cut and dry. And so when Vitalik mentions that sometimes legal responsibility is subjective, I would push back a little and say that many times legal responsibility and lines of legal obligation are indeterminate and ambiguous. And so the code as law mantra is extremely attractive. It's a very popular meme within crypto, but it also has some layer, it's also quite irresponsible in talking about legal liability, lines of responsibility, not just at the smart contract and application level, but at the deep protocol level. So it's intimately bound up with this idea of protocol immutability, as an example. The idea that Bitcoin, the protocol, cannot change because crypto law says it cannot change, and to the extent we can make changes, we can only make changes to do technical maintenance, technical upgrades, but the underlying protocol incentives cannot be changed. And obviously, there are a lot of reasons why that's a bad idea. Software has bugs, much like legal codes have bugs, and humans have this unique ability to identify those bugs, assess the risks of different remedial pathways, and then try, imperfectly as we may, to address those risks.
We discussed yesterday about this idea, like connecting the crypto law or what is coded and the real world, and some of the ideas that that Montenegro is definitely working on now is like this international arbitration court and the public notary system that will recognize some of the features coded and some of the features that are like in the blockchain. And connecting these two worlds is one of the challenges of the blockchain, and it's been with us for like last 10 years, I guess. So what is the do you think that's a right approach, or that's the right direction, and are we onto something? What is your impression and feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great idea. I don't know if you should have announced it, because now other people might run to do it faster. But so we gotta push fast. But I think that the main thing that's sort of required in this context, anyways, so even if someone does go ahead, is like education for the arbitrators, because no one knows today how to judge and rule on these issues. There's a not even like a consensus on what a smart contract is, how it should be treated. There are sort of different schools of thought on to what extent the smart contract could be binding, or to what extent is going to constitute a contract, like a legal contract in contract law, like whose contract law will recognize that contract, how many contracts are there between which parties that are interacting with this thing. which ones create contracts, which ones don't, which ones create securities, which ones don't. There's so many basic legal questions that are sort of, I would say, have been answered in different ways by different people from different traditions that that sort of background education, is or the research and then the education, is sort of like going to be the main advantage that like any sort of like court could have in this space if they're trying to operate.
I mean, part of me definitely regrets using the, kind of popularizing the word, contract and smart contract for, these programs that run on Ethereum. I think, because ultimately these are just, computer programs that run as part of the Ethereum blockchain, right? And, you can use them for many different things. And contract, is this concept from law, and, to some extent this concept from morality, it has these kind of ideas of obligations baked in. And this is part of a broader pattern where blockchains are this kind of very general purpose computing technology, and sometimes they get pigeonholed into being a financial thing, and then that often leads to the outcome that people expect anything done on a blockchain to be treated the same way that you would treat financial applications, which is totally doesn't make sense. And even just one example, right? Say ENS names, right? So Vitalik, right? So if you want to send me tokens, or even send me a message on Blockscan chat, for example, instead of typing in my Ethereum address, you can type in Vitalik.eth, right? That's a non-financial application, but an ENS name is technically an ERC-721 NFT, right? And so if you start saying NFTs are financial assets, then you just totally ended up kind of treating this kind of much larger category of things as something that's financed, when really there's plenty of really sensible blockchain applications that are not financial. There's plenty of applications of Ethereum contracts that are not kind of smart contracts in Nick Szabo's sense of the term, of being these digital lockboxes. So I definitely think it's important to think about those kinds of concepts separately too.
And you touched upon something very important, which is what is finance, what is not finance in crypto world, because we need to regulate it quite substantially, and we need to work at the main application of blockchain is in finance as of now, but in the future it's not going to be that way, right? Which other applications you presume are going to take place soon, or which direction the blockchain will take, and what would be the role of regulation in that sense? Because these non-financial applications will be probably regulated in somewhat different way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best thing that could be done, sort of from a regulatory perspective, is to acknowledge the existence of the non-financial aspects, just to recognize and to just to state that they exist is already an intervention. Also it is to say non-technical. It is non-technical. Also very much a very important and valuable sort of intervention to take. I think there's all sorts of concepts that we can create, though, like non-financial securities, non-financial smart contracts. I'm not sure actually. So actually, here's a question: how do we? The question is how do we elaborate on what a smart contract is in order to help mitigate the situation, or are we just stuck with this notion? Sorry.
Boris, you want to?
I mean, with the smart contract question, I think in many ways the cat's out of the bag. So once lawyers saw the term contract and smart contract, they ran with it the world over. And so the point you were making earlier about there being quite a lot of difference in the way that legal systems approach the term smart contract. Some conclude that a smart contract is a legally binding obligation. Others don't, with the full spectrum in between. I think is here to stay. And so I think within crypto, there will be a need to show that these are applications that go beyond strictly legal contracts or beyond strict transactional terms. So to your question about non-financial applications, we can imagine membership DAOs, where every person has some sort of a crypto token that represents their membership in a DAO. It doesn't have to be financial. It doesn't even have to be an asset. We can think of blockchain mechanisms for making it non-transferable, so that it really represents something like a single point of truth, a fact, attestation, as Vitalik phrased it earlier. And I think those are really exciting because they're general purpose uses of blockchain. We can think of land registries, court records, and so forth. And those are very promising.
Good, thank you guys. We have quite a few questions actually. Thank you so much. I'm struggling to go through them. So the first one is for all the guests. We are running away from Wall Street. I did as well in the past. So, and which are exploiting our data. How we can ensure that in the end we will not face the same problems regarding our personal freedoms?
I mean, that's a hell of a legal battle. I mean, and also there are other aspects, you know, political, technical, scientific.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends a lot on like different aspects of Wall Street that we dislike have different answers. I think, right? Like there's you know, the aspect of Wall Street that it's like a set of very large financial entities that like act anti-competitively in a lot of ways, and you know, and that's the sort of thing that like the crypto space kind of partially solves by the fact that it's like so relatively open access to build a new thing, and you know, Uniswap was just like built from one guy, and now it's you know, like outcompeting the big parts of the centralized exchange space. But at the same time, like sometimes concentration like is caused by market dynamics that sort of thing is not going to fix. And in some of like another thing of Wall Street that people like sometimes object to is kind of, you know, the close relationship between like the big players and the government, and how that leads to the big players writing rules that are kind of very favorable to them and you know, not favorable to anyone else. And there's definitely risks of that happening in the crypto space, right? Like there's I think there's definitely already, I think, like people inside of like some like large crypto projects, like exchanges or whatever, that try to kind of go around and like suggest the laws that basically say that like either, you know, this like very onerous and difficult license that I already have is like the only way to be legally participate in this industry, or like this other project that fits into this category that are just like or that my own project just happens to not fit into like that category is important, and like you have to really regulate it hard, and like these kinds of arguments. And like I'm not sure there's any magic way to kind of resist like there's no magic kind of one-line principle for resisting it, or this sort of thing. I think just like having these conversations earlier, and making like basically like front running those kinds of bad actors might be like one of the best ways to do it. I don't know.
Sorry, I just want to say that the privacy though is like privacy is a great way to do that, and you know, we have rights to financial privacy, and those need to be like elaborated and updated and like reinterpreted and try to understand, you know, what the law like sort of needs to be in the changing sort of privacy environment in crypto and Wall Street.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind with market dynamics is, as powerful as Wall Street is, as pervasive as it is globally, finance is just a fraction of the global real economy. And so one way to think about financial privacy is to think in broader terms of economic rights, so the right to transact in fundamental terms, and thinking about our civil and political privacy rights, and expanding that and incorporating that into blockchain legal forms and crypto legal forms.
Great. The next question is, do you think that the company law in Montenegro should be adjusted to be DAO friendly, to enable collective governance of organization in a full legal sense? Right now, all companies need to have a single point person of responsibility. What we need is something like multi-sig governance in a legal sense. This is something Vlad might want to start off, or Vitalik, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like like in Wyoming, right, there is this kind of DAO bill that basically like allows a DAO to kind of like register as an entity, and then like the DAO as a thing, like you literally put the Ethereum address into your the registration form, and like that's the thing that actually legally owns the property, which like I think like is like definitely like a really cool first step, right? Like because it does basically like the government just needs to do this one thing, and then people can use like contracts to experiment with all kinds of different governance structures. And there's this project called City DAO that's kind of built under this legal framework, and it's basically trying to like pool people's money together and actually like build a city in Wyoming, and like eventually do on-chain decentralized governance and those kinds of things. So like that would be like things like that are definitely one place to start. Then I mean I think there's a lot of other like opportunities for interaction between the kind of legal layer and the like crypto layer as well. Like this kind of like arbitration is definitely also a great example.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because DAOs have like very, very sort of different, immature, not really well understood like legal personhood, and to think about trying to govern them from like national corporate law seems like it may be almost like violating that to some extent possibly, and so like to me DAOs today are very passive forms, and the idea of like doing like active national governance of them, even the idea of them having like the ability to give power of attorney to someone seems like contrary to the spirit of them. And so like it's for me the DAOs are sort of characterized by the passivity of the corporate form and the activity of the members, or the I don't know what to call them. Maybe I think they might be called members, and so it's a very, very interesting form that has lots of opportunities to change in the future, and it's going to be something that corporate law should respect, as opposed to something that they should try to control and define, and sort of allowing the development of the legal personhood of a DAO, as opposed to trying to say, I know what this is a partnership, or this is a limited liability corporation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and it takes us back to the discussion about identity. And so because there are so many different DAO forms, different types of DAOs, and people can belong to different DAO communities, I think there's a need to, legally speaking, acknowledge these plural legal spaces with a lot of overlaps, potentially some tensions. And so an approach to a DAO law needs to take that pluralism into account. At the most superficial level, I think we need to think about financial DAOs and non-financial DAOs, like the membership DAOs we mentioned earlier. And going back to Vitalik, your point about City DAO as an example, we can think of the desired legal form for a community DAO that wants to undertake a construction project in Montenegro, right? So one of the things, Montenegro is so beautiful, and one of the things that's most remarkable is how much construction there's going on right now. So if a group of Montenegrins wanted to form a DAO to build a structure, a museum, or a public works project, and they wanted to make anonymous contributions. And if foreigners wanted to make anonymous contributions to that DAO because they believed in that vision, should those non-Montenegrin participants have a right to participate in that DAO, to transact within that DAO, to join that DAO, and so forth? And what should be the limits of that? I think are really important questions that get at fundamental issues of identity that we were discussing.
I think we are giving good ideas to the politicians who are running for local elections. The city DAO sounds like something that they would love to do.
Yeah,
So,
they would understand it.
yeah. How should blockchain adapt to answer concerns about carbon footprint of its operation? So Montenegro is since 1991, I think, we are officially an ecological state. Not much has been done since then, but in our constitution it's written like that. So we need to help Montenegro move ahead, and as well as the crypto community. What is your view on this?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely care about the environment, and I think the Ethereum community does too. Like our big, multi-year effort to kind of switch to proof of stake, which is, finally in test networks and is looking kind of months away from launch. Is I think a big testament to that. And like I think aside from that, there's definitely a lot of applications that could be built on blockchains to help people and communities improve the environment, like even things like DAOs that like might include like incentives, like whether that's economic incentives or kind of something kind of gamified or social or something else to improve the local environment, or even just like point out ways that the local environment could be improved. I think there's lots of really good ideas in that space that could be done as well.
I also think that since Ethereum, I think Ethereum lends itself really well also to the sort of trade of carbon offsets and to the even redemption of carbon offsets, where basically you could sort of imagine, people sort of buying and redeeming carbon credits as a way to sort of offset their previous sins, and it's kind of not the best. It's not as good as actually going and making an application that changes behavior and cleans up garbage. But for some people, it may be the only thing they can do, or for some institutions, it may be the only thing they can do, and I think Ethereum is actually potentially a really good place to experiment with sort of the trading of carbon securities of all kinds.
I wanted to ask it maybe as a question. So, do you think that Ethereum have a responsibility for championing these sort of changes to the Bitcoin protocol, for instance? So there's been quite a lot of work done on proof of stake Bitcoin, and so if proof of stake Ethereum fulfills its promise of 99% decreases in carbon emissions, should there be a moral responsibility to champion this more broadly within crypto?
Ooh, interfering in other people's internal affairs, that's fun. I mean, I don't know, I've never opposed that sort of stuff too much, so yeah, sure.
I mean, they gotta do it. I mean, I'm down. I mean, they gotta though.
Good, and maybe a question for Boris for the end. What would be, as a professor, what is the best way to educate local population about crypto? And what kind of practical advice to young Montenegrins can we give from this stage?
Yeah, thank you. I think, for me personally, the best way to learn something is to do something. And so I spend way too much time clicking through on MetaMask and exploring the Ethereum metaverse, but not only Ethereum. And I think there's no substitute for the experience. Going out, playing with different DeFi protocols, joining DAOs, being involved in crypto discourse on Twitter, on Discord, elsewhere. One of the things that I think is so remarkable about the crypto community, very similar to Montenegro, is how welcoming it is. It really, it really is the most welcoming community that I've ever found. And I think students, young and old, will learn very quickly once they get into crypto. But that first step is very intimidating. The learning curve is very intimidating. I'm sure everyone in the room is far along on that journey, but please encourage your friends and loved ones to join you on that journey, because it's a really beautiful one and really empowering one.
You guys also want to chip in for the end, and we are done for the day with this question. Any advice to young Montenegrins or in general?
I mean, I think still lots of opportunities to do great things in the crypto space, and in my opinion, the best way to learn is to go try something, try to build something. So try to build something today.
I think the big advice for me is don't get scammed. Don't get scammed. Don't be frauded. Don't be phishing. Don't click on links. that you don't know where they are from. Like, you know, don't believe them when they're telling you that they want your private information in your email. You know, be careful, because it's hard, and it's very easy to imagine that you're like too late to get into the safe projects and therefore must get into a small project, and then most of the small ones are scams. And so you got to be careful, and you can almost be sure that someone who's selling you an opportunity to get rich is, you know, like part of a scam project. You can like almost be sure, and that's like, you know, a very, very real risk. People lose all their money. People lose money that they can't afford to lose, and it's probably like the biggest single bad failure mode of someone getting into crypto. Is just like losing all their money. And so yeah, please don't do that.
Absolutely, the rule of law is very important there. Yeah, so we need to, but it's also self.
Yeah, but you
control.
can't. At the moment, you can't have faith just in the law. You have to check yourself whether it's a scam.